Hello and welcome to the Max MPS Radio. My name is Frisse and today I'm again joined by Aaron Brown from Myonomics, who was on the podcast before. I'm pretty glad that you are back. We will talk about macronutrient distribution and nutrient timing. I'm trying to summarize everything in one podcast, which will be a hell of a job, but we will try to fit it into 1 hour, maybe a little bit over, and if it's too long, we will actually split it in two parts. Aaron, I'm glad that you're back, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So welcome to the podcast again.
The honour's all mine. You've had a great list of podcast attendees so far, so I feel quite honoured to be part of them, and hopefully people will take a lot away from the podcast. So more than happy, more than honoured to be on.
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks for the kind words. Before we actually dive into the theory of macronutrient distribution and nutrient timing, my first question will be more for how to individualize that for a situation for a client, for example. And it's actually what do you usually assess before deciding how to distribute macronutrients for an individual?
So there's sort of, you can think there's sort of a hierarchy in terms of this as well. So there's like things that are more important, things that are less important, but they all should still go into consideration when it comes to individualizing the process. There's some pretty big ones that we can't really not do if we want to get the best we can. So like protein intake's pretty important if you want to gain muscle, and we have to get a decent amount of protein to do that. And then some minimums of carbohydrate and fat intake are probably appropriate, but beyond that there are some considerations you definitely make, and the first one's going to be around preference, because outside of that the other things are just smaller things. So adherence is the most important thing. They need to enjoy, they need to be able to do what you say and do it for long enough to get the result that they want. So preference, so I'll often send part of my questionnaire, the question will be, I'll also use a food diary, so the question will be, do you prefer higher carbohydrate or higher fat foods? And I'll get them to give me some examples, because sometimes people are a bit, again, education is an important one. Some people might think that pizza is a high carbohydrate food, but there's a hell of a lot of fat in pizza. So I'll get them to give me some examples. So maybe they like more of a split, and maybe from the food diary it might be obvious what they do like and what they don't like. And I might try to just modify that and sort of maybe put all of what they eat into MyFitnessPal, have a look at what that is on average, and then maybe sort of stick closer to that. So there's less change needed to be made. But again, if someone's got a pretty rubbish diet or a pretty horrible diet, they've not got much fruits and veggies, it's very sporadic, it's very here and there, there's not many, they're not hitting the minimums that we want, may have to make bigger changes. But yeah, the first branch is sort of preference, and then beyond that, there's not that much else that really matters. There's some sort of clinical populations where it might be important to take some consideration. So PCOS, type 2 diabetes, or individuals that are obese, individuals with hypothyroidism these populations, some of them tend to deal with carbohydrates better than others. Some people tend to be better off with a lower carbohydrate amount. Some tend to not want to go below certain minimums that can be important, but again, it's going to be a much smaller factor than losing body fat total caloric intake. Total caloric intake is going to be the big precedent that we're trying to put in place. And again, it's also a part of it is where they're at now. So when we said protein's pretty important, if they're only getting 0.5 grams per kilogram, I'm not going to try and put them at 2 straight away. I'm probably going to try and get them close to the lower end of that scale, maybe 1.5 grams per kilogram. Might even be too much to start with, but I'm going to try and push them more towards the goal, but not so far away from where they're at that they can't do it. Again, adherence is a massive part of it, and again, you just sort of, it's important. I always say to clients when we get an initial consultation, like the first sort of period of time of coaching is going to be sort of me learning about them. There are some basic principles and theories and things that we don't know for fact, but we know pretty reasonable to think that are consistent. But individualization is all about taking a client from where they are and then just modifying over time, the appropriate amount of volume, the appropriate amount of whatever it is. That's the coaching process. It's not just being given a plan and then going away with it.
Yeah, it's also just hugely about how you adjust things, and that what you said about online coaching is really the process of getting towards the individual moving optimal in an online setting. I remember you saw it as well on the RP conference in July in London, where Steve and Pascal, at this point I have to give them credits, talked about that concept that for an individual you have like the optimal or the optimum for is pretty individual, and it's also moving. For example, if you have like a lot of time and you don't you have holidays, you have a lot of time to spend in the gym or on your bodybuilding goals, for example, and then maybe later back on you have to work more and have more stress, and that kind of changes your optimal state that you can reach at that point. And I think that's a really good thing to consider, because I remember Mike actually talking about this in a recent podcast. I think it was with Steve as well, where he just said that you should always strive for optimal or for optimum and see where it actually lies, but then scale back for your individual situation to actually fit it into your lifestyle and your preferences and stuff like that. So I think especially in things where the absolute amounts aren't the most important things, like you can have like a pretty wide range of protein intake, and where you actually falls doesn't really matter that much, and it's more about what are actually your preferences and what can you actually adhere to and fit into your lifestyle. So I think that was a great start, and we will go through all the macronutrients now, starting with protein thing, because I just kind of structured them in the way I would do it, so hopefully that will be fine with you as well, I think so. So we will start with proteins, and my first broad question would be, how do you set up proteins for or protein intake for different goats?
Again, so there's going to be a relative amount based on calorie intake, and then there's going to be a distribution. Do you want me to talk about distribution now as well?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the first consideration, the first and most important consideration is going to be the total amount. And then again, going back to the point where are they currently and what's realistic for them to do. That's going to be the first thing you think about, where are they currently and what's realistic. But then that's based on a foundation of what is ideal, if that makes sense. So again, it's that we know what's probably ideal or around ideal, and we just work back from there if we need to, or we bring them as close as we can to that ideal. And the range seems to be like 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram protein per day. Seems to be a reasonable number. So I usually just 2 times the body weight in kilograms protein tends to work for most people. And I just give them a range. I'll say you can go within 10% either side or 15% either side or something. I don't mind if they go a bit up and a bit below, and it just sort of fits them within that range. That's a pretty simple way to do it in terms of protein. Distribution wise, it seems that. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I will ask questions about distribution later. So nowadays, for this question, I just wanted to know like absolute amounts for like massing, dieting, and where you may tend to go higher with protein in certain situations. Yeah.
So again, dieting may be a case for a little bit higher amounts, and it's going to be based on personal preference again. Diet proteins has a high thermic effect. It is more satiating. People tend to enjoy it. It's harder to overeat. It's a little bit less palatable if you keep it fairly plain. So again, it might go a little bit higher during that, but maybe not. I don't know. It depends on the person. It depends where they are. And again, during massing, people sort of talk about the theory of making protein lower because you don't need as much. You don't need as much. You don't need as many amino acids because you're not breaking as many down during the process of being catabolic or not having enough energy available. But I think again, I don't like to take it down. There's some I think it's a bit strange, but there's some data from Jose Antonio saying that people gaining weight on really, really high protein intakes, like 3 to 4 grams per kilogram, showed as much lean mass gain and less fat mass gain, if that makes sense. But it might be due to a manipulation of energy balance through the thermic effect of food. And again, these are all. It's important to note that a lot of these studies the nutritional intake is reported by the individual, so it can be wrong. It can be misreported, if that makes sense, unknowingly or knowingly. So we have to just go off of what they say.
Wasn't that even observational data?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So it's self-reported. It's self-reported nutritional intake. So again, I'm still unsure of why this is this case when we have this 1.8 to 2.2 grams is enough in terms of creating an optimal nitrogen balance. But yeah, so I tend to not really change it. The only thing I'll do is increase it if someone's dieting, but I tend to just go with 2 grams per kilogram is plenty for most people. As long as it's, and again, that's with the onus that it's high quality. So vegetarians and vegans, I might increase that amount by 10 to 20% or something like that, just to make sure that they get enough. I might look at the food diary first, and if they've got a good mix of quality proteins, or the mix of the proteins is good enough, I might just set it at the 2 grams per kilogram, but I'll tend to do it higher. And again, another point back on on massing. When we're massing, we're eating more caloric intake, and especially if we're eating more foods that are dense in carbohydrates. Carbohydrate, and specifically gluten, is a protein, and that can contribute to total daily protein intake. So that's a protein that's not really ideal in terms of its ability to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It's low. It's not got very high leucine content. The amino acids in it it isn't a complete protein in terms of the amino acids in it. So maybe there may be a case of just keeping it where it is because of that too. So again, it can be complicated to think about, but in practice, I tend to just go 2 grams per kilogram for most people, and then increase if they're dieting, if they're hungry. And again, if someone's dieting towards competition, I know Eric Helms did a lot of the research on, or did some of the research on the recommendation of going up to I think 3.2 or something. I think it was 2 to 3.2 grams per kilogram was seen to be a little bit more beneficial in terms of muscle retention. So maybe that's potential. So anywhere between 2 grams and 3 grams is where I tend to go, and based on the goal and based on personal preference most of all.
Yeah, sounds absolutely fine. I think if I remember correctly, in most of the research we actually see a trend of not really that much benefits for most people towards 1.6 grams per kg of body mass, but I think a few individuals actually benefited of more towards the 2.2 grams per kilograms of body mass, and usually I just tend to go with that because at least my avatar of people I talk to on my Instagram and podcast probably as well, they're just people that want to maximize things, and from there I just think that 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is a good idea to actually, because you could be that individual that actually benefited of a little bit more protein. So I just tend to be on the safe side of that. And nowadays we also know that higher protein intakes actually doesn't damage your kidneys. So we have some good data from Antonio as well, from his research. And I think as we said, there isn't really an absolute amount you should take. There's probably an amount you that you will benefit from the most, and then you can even go higher. But there isn't. It's pretty individual. If you are somebody who has some problems on appetite and hunger management, maybe higher your protein is a good idea. And even if it's just preference and you can adhere to it better, just a good idea.
Yeah. There's not necessarily a downside, like you say. People think that if you have more than a certain bolus of protein, it doesn't get absorbed, and when it's deaminated, it creates ammonia as well. And ammonia is a little bit toxic in the body, but it's not. Clearly, the studies have shown it's not massively negative. And when it's deaminated, the protein can be oxidized and then used to create glucose. As we know, gluconeogenesis occurs, so it's not like it's not used. It can contribute to other things. And again, that's just sort of making sure you're getting enough. So if you are deaminating some and creating glucose from it, that's fine. But you are ensuring that your protein balance and muscle protein synthesis response is at the cap it can be based on protein intake anyway. So I'd say it's worth the trade-off of a bit of extra protein and a bit less carbohydrate or fat in your diet, definitely, if calories are matched. Yeah.
And talking about protein timing actually, or distribution, my first question is more meal based, so more towards one meal to actually maximize anabolism. It's actually what would be a minimum amount of essential amino acids, especially leucine, to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah, so leucine's the the sort of initiator, and research sort of shows like 700 milligrams to 3 grams is what is ideal. And again, it's based on body weight. And I think on a meal-to-meal basis, if we're taking in that 2.2 grams, split that into 4 to 6 servings, and we're looking at like 0.3 to 0.5 or 6 grams per kilogram of quality protein per meal, tends to do it pretty well on that basis. So yeah, the data, a lot of the research will show 700 mgs to, or 0.7 grams to 3 grams of leucine is sufficient to maximally initiate muscle protein synthesis. And then as long as the protein source has a complete profile of amino acids, then, and there's enough protein total daily, then it tends to be fine.
Yeah, I usually just go with 3 grams of leucine and around 10 to 12 grams of EAAs.
12 grams is what they use in a lot of the studies of the EAAs. Right?
Yeah, I think 10 to 12 grams, but I usually I am a bit biased towards the higher side just to make sure. But like as you said, like if we actually have that amount of total protein on the day that we actually talked about, and you kind of split that even, and you have like a quality source of maybe a milk product or some sources of meat, then like just animal protein basically, then you will probably hit those 3 grams of leucine and 12 grams of EAAs in the single meal. So trending towards more on the day side, so how to distribute meals over the day to maximize anabolism. My question would be, what would be your recommendation to split up protein over the day actually?
Yeah, so one of the big theories that has been more popular of late is the theory of leucine threshold and how it and the refractory period afterwards. I think a lot of other people have talked about it and will do it better justice than I will, but it's basically there's an amount of amino acids, leucine to initiate, and then other amino acids that take you up to a maximal protein synthesis response. And then when we're there, the theory is based off that studies have shown that people intravenously dripped with amino acids for a period of time. It didn't stay heightened. It came back down, and the time it took to come back down to sort of a baseline level was about 3 to 5 hours, and then initiating again goes back up. So imagine we do care about the peaks, but we care about the space underneath the line. So we're trying to create as much space underneath the line. So we want as many peaks as we can throughout the day. So, but we've got to let it come back down to sort of get the biggest peak we can. So again, you could have them more often, but the peaks wouldn't be quite as high. But then the space under the curve would probably be similar. So it's not a massive thing, but the leucine threshold makes sense, and I'd like to sort of use that theory to start with. So in terms of servings, so we said that 4 to 6 servings, so every 3 to 5 hours is usually appropriate for most people, depending on how you're awake and stuff like that. Yeah. And then distribution in terms of when during the day. Sometimes it seems to be not important but beneficial. First thing in the morning, maybe get a serving of protein. And I think Miguel Blacut talked about it on a podcast. It's quite interesting that that fasting will increase your sensitivity to the muscle protein synthesis response in terms of a protein serving, so a protein feeding, sorry. So you won't need as much amino acids or as much essential amino acids and leucine to get the same response. So in a morning, you may not need the 0.5 grams per kilogram of protein to get that response. You may need a lot less, so you may need a lot more, but either way, if you split it evenly, it doesn't really matter. It's just sort of semantics. But yeah, so a protein serving in the morning.
Interesting.
Something around workouts seems to be quite interesting. So it doesn't necessarily matter if it's before or after. The potentially maybe benefit after, depending on how long your workouts are as well, because the anabolic response of training sort of heightens the response to amino acids. So that the response is elevated, and it seems to dip, or the sensitivity seems to dip as time goes by. So if you take advantage, it doesn't mean you have to run out of the gym and have a protein shake, but it means that if you have something in that first like hour to 2 hours, it's going to be the more sensitive you are going to be to amino acids, if that makes sense. But if you're training frequently enough, then you're already going to have those spikes. So it could wash out with total protein intake. I'm not sure. It may be beneficial. It's just a theory again. It can just be. It can be interesting to think about, but it might not be that important. But having some amino acids available when we're training can be quite important. So having a breakfast meal, so having something first thing in the morning, a protein serving, having something within an hour before your workout or 2 hours, and having a little bit something after could be beneficial. If you want to sort of think of what is the most ideal theory that I can think about, that'd probably be something like that, one of those servings. And then there's some potential benefit for some protein before bed. So like some of the research on casein protein has been like that the MPS was maintained overnight, resting metabolic rate was improved overnight. So again, I don't know if it's just mechanistic or if it's going to have make a difference long term. But if it can help you sleep, so having some food before bed could maybe help you sleep. The amino acid tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin that can help sleep. You can have that in your amino acids. Again, maybe if we talk about carbohydrates later, that could be something you could sort of mix a carbohydrate and protein meal that could be beneficial. But yeah, so like the morning, bedtime, and then workout window maybe is sort of the times where I sort of think about it. And then anywhere in between, if they want to have the 6 servings or the 4 servings, is fine by me.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds really familiar to what I actually educate my clients on. And I think for a minimum, when you're actually gaining 3 meals is kind of like a minimum. And if you want to kind of maximize things, you want to trend more towards the 4 to maybe even higher side, like 4 to 6 is probably pretty much the same. And I think we can't really, or we didn't actually showed a difference between 3 and 4 meals over the day, but just mechanistically and just the logic behind it makes sense. And I think you really summarized that pretty good. I think the 3 to 5 hours are really dependent on like protein source, what kind of protein you're actually eating, like what amount of protein you actually eat, and other like macronutrients that influence your gastric emptying rate. For example, if you eat like lean meat, but you eat like a hollow, like just a lot of carbs and fat with it, that will sit in your stomach quite long. So yeah, those 3 to 5 hours are really dependent on a few factors other than protein, just protein. And what you talked about, the peri-workout protein timing, I actually didn't ask the question before, so I just want to summarize it again. As you said, it doesn't really matter if you slam down a shake, or if you have like an immediate post-workout protein source. If you had something pre-workout, again, probably 3 to 5 hours between pre and post. It will probably don't really make like a difference, at least in research. I mean, you don't really know what will happen if you get your post-workout protein immediately after workout for like 10 years, and you're actually a trained subject who wants to maximize everything. It may just makes a small difference, and I think that's really hard to detect in a study. So for me at least, if somebody eats like 1 to 2 hours before training, then maybe trains 2 hours plus the driving that they have to take to get to the gym and stuff. It may just not be a bad idea to just drink a protein shake. I mean, you don't have to sprint to your locker room and slam down your shake, but maybe get some protein in after the workout if you want to maximize anabolism. It's probably not a bad idea, I think.
No, I'd like to just say a few things on some of them points. So I think like the higher meal frequency in terms of protein feedings is just a practicality thing. So I think it's for the higher your total caloric intake, the more meals you'll need to eat to sort of get that, to be realistically get that in over the day. And it's sort of important to remember that we don't just eat protein in isolation. We'll tend to eat some carbohydrates, fruits, veggies, fats, whatever with the meal. So it's just splitting meals into a reasonable length so that we can actually intake them. And then in terms of the protein window, I think there are times where it can be more important and less important, or potentially more important. So in a hypercaloric state, we're sort of going to have amino acids or nutrients in the blood that are going to prevent amino acids being broken down or being used for other things. So it's going to be less important during that time. But hypercaloric times, we might have a higher use of nitrogen, use of amino acids for fuel because we're eating less calories than we need. So there's a potential for that, especially if we're training hard and the leaner we get. So maybe it'll be a little bit more important during that time. So maybe getting something before and after may be more important at that time. And then lastly, like we talked about it a little bit beforehand, and shout out to Jacob Skepis about he posted today about a sort of a trend within the evidence-based camp crew, whatever you want to call it, that anything that's not got research showing that it directly works, and if it's something's mechanistic, it's not evidence-based. And that is important to understand, and I think that there is merit in that. But it's also important to understand that if we're working with a physique athlete or someone that wants to maximise results and there's no potential negative effects, there's nothing to be lost. Do you know what I mean? The person's willing to do it, they have the resources, the energy, the time, do it. Do you know what I mean? That could be 1% or 2% or 3% benefit over the next year or two, and that could be the difference between them winning something or losing something, or sticking with you as a coach or believing in you. So it's definitely worth that little bit extra, and worth just chancing something that's not risky, definitely. So yeah, I agree. So like the post-workout window is the example. So it may not have shown benefits over 6 weeks in a study with an untrained population, but over a year, 2 years, 3 years in a high level bodybuilder, maybe it does. Maybe they gain an extra pound or 2 pounds, and that may be something that's beneficial to them or worthwhile.
Yeah, as you said, and like a bodybuilding with the bodybuilding subject over years, it may make a difference, but that's pretty hard to study. Because actually you have to find a lot of bodybuilders that actually want to do your study, and then you have to do like a lengthy study. And I remember that even back in the paper from Alan Aragon, I think Schoenfeld did contribute to it as well. They even tend to say that they still like the shake post-workout, just for practicality, so they don't have to, like, I mean, you can skip it, but then you tend to still have to eat within, like, let's say 1 to 2 hours, and let's say you have to drive back, and then you have to shower and stuff like that, and you got work to do, and then you have to cook, and it may just be super practical and super easy, super fast to just drink a protein shake and don't have to worry about getting protein in post-workout as fast as possible in a quote-unquote. So I think that summarized that one pretty well. Is there anything left for protein you want to say about timing or distribution?
Not really. I think that covers the main points. I would say that we've covered some of the practicality and some of the theory and some of the potential mechanisms that may be beneficial, but we're not sure about. So I think pretty much covered, yeah. And on that last point, yeah, if you think about practically about the workout window, if you eat a meal an hour before you train, there's an hour space there, and then train for 2 hours, half an hour till you get home, it would have been 3.5, 4 hours anyway. So you would have eaten, if you were going to distribute it in that way, you would eat then anyway. So I don't see the problem in a high quality protein shake that may, especially if you're hypocaloric, that may help you stay fuller. And so as whey protein seems to be quite filling, and not have super high palatability. So I don't see why there's any reason to not do it. Do you know what I mean? There's no argument against it, so why not do it?
Yeah, I think also the length of your training session matters as well, because I know that for me, especially in later phases of my mesocycles, when training gets pretty voluminous, like the volume gets pretty high, my sessions tend to get pretty lengthy. And if you then think about it, let's say you have like a 2 to 3 hour session, you have to get to the gym maybe half an hour, you eat an hour before, then you kind of are like in that 5 hour window thingy. And if you then travel back again home, shower maybe, then have to cook and then eat, maybe that's like 6 to 7 hours. And I'm not saying that would be like a disaster, but just for, if you think about it, that situation over years versus just drinking a shake immediately post-workout, or let's say on the way home, may make a difference. And
in that case, in a hypocaloric state, I might even get someone to take something in during the workout, like an essential amino acid or something like that, and maybe some carbohydrates, because that is like, the likelihood that they're going to break down some amino acids or some muscle for fuel is going to be greatly elevated in a hypocaloric state. And like I say, especially if you're doing cardio as well, like sessions can get long. So I would say that even may be a case where we actually use protein intra-workout. And it can either be in the form of whey or in an essential amino acid.
You mean in a situation where somebody trains long and is hypocaloric?
Yeah. Like 3-hour workout and hypocaloric. If they've only eaten, if it was like an hour or an hour and a half before they trained, I would say that there probably is a benefit there. And I would probably try and get some carbohydrates in, but I imagine we'll talk about carbohydrates.
Yeah, we will talk about it later as well. So yeah, I had something in my mind, but now it's gone. So let me just think if I can get it back. Yeah, I think we will just move forward, and maybe I can get it back later. So talking about fats next. I think it makes a lot of sense because you have like a minimum amount of fat that is essential, and like carbohydrates are not essential to a point. So yeah, they're probably essential for a physique athlete, but we will talk about that later. So I will move on with fats, and my first question for fat intake would be, what is the minimal amount of fat you program? And what would be a good rationale to go higher than that?
So a blanket amount of minimum is like 0.6 grams per kilogram or something like that. I tend to put that as a minimum that I put in for somebody, just because it tends to seem to be it's just more risky than it's worth going any lower. You could do some cases, some people can get away with it, some people need more. It tends to be more of an upper end of the minimum someone needs, if that makes sense, versus the lower end of what someone needs. I'd rather do that than the other way around. And then in terms of increasing it, preference again is a big one. Someone likes fatty foods. If someone's eating a lot of food in a hypercaloric state, fats are quite palatable, quite easy to consume, a little bit cheaper in some cases, so students might not be able to afford stuff, so maybe, I don't know, like fattier meats are a lot cheaper, oils, stuff like that are pretty cheap. Maybe a case where I increase it. When we talked before about the clinical populations where high carbohydrate intakes might not be necessary if they're sedentary or if they have type 2 diabetes, something like that, it might be a little bit more beneficial for blood glucose maintenance or management, or they may feel better if they have a little bit of a lower carbohydrate amount. Some people tend to feel a little bit bloated with super high carbohydrates, so based on, like, say, the individual situation, again, that's more anecdotal than anything that I can really see. A lot of the times that is the fact that high carbohydrates make them bloated is because they're having a lot of like resistant starches or fibre or something. That might be it might be a surrogate, so carbohydrates just mean that they eat more fibre, which makes them more bloated, so I'm not sure. And higher fat intake, that's pretty much it. So I'd say the minimum is 0.6, higher based on preference, and then maybe in a hypercaloric state, as long as someone gets like the minimum that I allow, or that I like to allow for carbohydrates, then they can increase it based on satiety and what they enjoy.
Yeah, I think a preference is probably the point that I wanted. It's actually the thing that I wanted to point out. So if your preference is higher fat, then especially if you're hypercaloric, there is and especially if you, for some individual, I'm in that situation currently, where I have actually problems to get my calories in because I'm that long in a gaining phase, and my body weight is at the highest in my entire life. So currently I can still eat all my calories, that is not a problem, but I'm pretty stuffed at the end of the day, and I tend to hire my calories in the last few months more towards more with fat macros actually than carbohydrates. And before that, I actually tended to higher carbohydrates because I had like my minimum amount of fat, and I think eating higher fats is just a little bit easier to get more calories in. As you said, for a student, it may be beneficial from a money perspective as well. And yeah, I think there's, as well with protein, there's like a minimum amount you should probably take, although there's some individual differences as well. But from there on, there's a pretty wide range of amounts of fat you can actually eat and still be somewhat, quote unquote, optimal, in an optimal state. So is there anything you want to say about timing fat intake over the day?
it's not massively important. I think there's some credence to maybe minimizing it around the workout window. But what's really, really important, and something that I've learned more recently, is that fat in isolation doesn't tend to... So fat as a macronutrient does not mechanistically slow down gastric emptying. It's the fact that it's more dense calorically. So the caloric amount of the meal is going to determine the gastric emptying time. So when we take out the total calorie amount and we look at the nutrients in isolation, it doesn't tend to make a difference. And anecdotally, a lot of old coaches and stuff like that. So I think John Meadows said he always has fat after his workout stuff, and it's always been fine and stuff like that. So I think it's less important than people think. Maybe some benefit. I mean, again, if you're eating fat and it's making the meal massively caloric, that might be something that you want to look at. Maybe have more carbohydrates and take away some of the fats out of the meal so it can be less dense in calories, but you still get a decent amount of glycogen repletion and all that stuff. Maybe, and then again, if the food that you're eating is dense in fat and it causes it might feel like it takes a long time to digest before a workout, maybe you don't want to have it then. But I wouldn't say fat doesn't tend to slow down gastric emptying as a standalone. It's more of its impact on caloric intake or caloric density of a meal. So you can eat less food, but it's more calorically dense, so the gastric emptying time is more per volume of food. That's what the studies looked at, is the volume of food rather than the caloric intake. So when caloric intake is equated, then it doesn't tend to make a difference.
MNU crew checking in. Yeah, I remember learning about that as well. Pretty interesting stuff, actually, because it's quite controversial, I guess. A lot of people think like fat, just for the pure sake of fat, is actually slowing down gastric emptying versus the amount of calories that you actually just eat from it. Cool, yeah, I think that covers that fat thing pretty well. We will move on carbohydrates, and actually we're pretty good on time, to be honest. Like 40 minutes in, we're through protein and fat. So moving on with carbohydrates, how do you then go with setting up carbs for the client situation or for the client?
Practically, it tends to be just fill the rest of the calories with carbohydrates. And one of the considerations I like to keep people, so like in terms of performance and recovery and stuff like that, there seems to not be massive benefit in research anyway above about 3 grams per kilogram of body weight in terms of carbohydrate intake. So for a 60 kilogram person, 180 kilograms above that doesn't necessarily by itself benefit the individual in terms of it as a standalone macronutrient, if that makes sense. So they get most of the benefits from it in terms of being full of glycogen, recovering from training, fueling performance and stuff like that. But again, it will depend on, and again, this is more going to be this. So again, practically, I just fill the rest of the calories in with it, but the amount needed or the amount relative to fats is going to be based on the activity of the person as well. So if someone does super high volumes, sort of the range I will work in is 3 to 6 grams per kilogram. I will push them towards the higher end if they need it. But if someone's less sedentary, I'll push them towards the lower end, if that makes sense. Again, it doesn't make a difference, but as a recommendation, 3 to 6 grams per kilogram is what I go with. If I was going to recommend an amount of carbohydrate, but practically it's super simple. I just fill the rest of the calories in with it.
I actually have exactly one thing noted down in my notes, and it is rest of calories.
I mean, if we're going to keep the calorie amount the same, that's the only way we can do it anyway. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you see any regarding timing? Maybe we can talk about general timing before. My next question is actually, do you see any benefits in peri-workout carb timing? But maybe we can talk about having carbs at other times of the day other than your workout before we actually dive into that. So
yeah, so as we talked about before, like if we're not talking about the peri-workout window, before bed is the only time where I'd really see any benefit. So the amino acid tryptophan is quite heavily dosed in carbohydrates, or one of the amino acids in gluten, for example, and that's a precursor to serotonin that can help sleep. So carbohydrate intake before bed is shown to decrease sleep latency, treat sleep onset latency, prevent the amount of wake ups during bed, all these other things. So it can be beneficial to that. It can also be nice to go to bed feeling a little bit fuller. And other than that, yeah, in terms of timing, that's the only real time that I would say outside of the peri-workout window where it may be beneficial in some cases. That would say to take some in.
Yeah.
And again,
absolutely.
outside of that, it's preference. Sorry, again, yeah, preference is always the most important thing.
Yeah, that's usually one thing I tell clients when they ask about how they can better their sleep quality and their sleep hygiene is maybe just get some carbs biasing towards your last meal before bed. And even then you have to kind of see that you aren't too full, so you don't, if you're massing and you have problems like me, don't save all your carbohydrates for your last meal before bed. It's quite interesting because normally when I'm dieting, I actually tend to save a lot of calories for the evening, because then I'm kind of finished with work and I can chill out and eat my stuff and I don't have anything to do before sleeping, and then I can actually sleep good because I'm not hungry. But when I'm on higher calories and I get problems like I have currently, I tend to spread my calories more over the whole day, so I tend to get a lot of calories in the beginning of the day as well, which I usually don't really like to, as it costs me time in the morning and sometimes I'm feeling lethargic from it. But right now it's just like a necessity to just get my calories in over the whole day. So I remember I had to sometimes eat like 2/3 or something of my calorie day intake at the end of the day, and which equalize about a good 2,000 calories for me right now, which when I'm dieting it wouldn't be a problem, or when I'm early in my gaining phase, but like right now, like eating 2,000 or more calories in one sitting is pretty tough for me, and I'm a good eater normally. So I think that's just like preference, as you said, is pretty important, to just spread out your carbs so that you fit your preferences. As I said, normally if I would be dieting, I wouldn't take that much carbohydrates in the beginning of the day, because I usually just feel lethargic. Is that a word? Yeah, lethargic, and yeah, it just costs me time in the morning that I could spend working. So preference is huge with that, and we will go into the peri-workout carb timing now. So maybe we can talk about each of those components, like pre, intra, and post workout individually, starting with pre. So what would be your recommendation or things that you would consider towards your pre-workout carbs?
Just want to make one little point on that, what you said before about you feeling lethargic after a carbohydrate meal. So like the term for that is postprandial solemness, and that's related to carbohydrates. Yeah. So something that maybe is a practical thing that for someone massing could do is make earlier meals in the day more carbohydrate, so more protein and fat based, so that they get less of that during the day. And then maybe if it's a denser sort of source of carbohydrates, so like cereal or something like that, you can have that before bed, so you get the benefit of feeling a little bit more lethargic, as well as the release of tryptophan and all those things. So maybe you could daily periodization of carbohydrates could be switched towards that. So maybe you could do something like that again. But that's just a practical thing that may work. I've never really tried that, to be totally honest. I don't really work with, a lot of my clients want fat loss, so a lot of them don't tend to, some of them do, but a lot of them don't tend to take massive amounts of carbohydrates in. But yeah, that could be a practical benefit. But yeah, in terms of, sorry, go on, in terms of pre-workout carbohydrates.
Yeah, just one really quick question. If you actually change your carbohydrates from training and rest days, do you do like daily undulating carbohydrates?
It depends on how often. So it depends on how often someone trains. If someone trains like more than 3 days a week, your off days are recovery days for training. Whereas if you train like 3 days and you've got like 2 days or 3 days between training and you're not that advanced, then you could probably get away with that. Yeah, you could probably reduce it on off days, because you're already going to be replete, especially if I mean, like during a maintenance phase as well, you could definitely do that, because you're not, the need to replete glycogen isn't as serious is probably not the right word, but isn't as intensive. So you're going to be pretty repleted most of the time if you're at maintenance, and especially hypercaloric, you're going to be repleted all the time. So maybe I don't think it'll make a difference to results, but you can maybe do it for in practicalities terms. Yeah, maybe.
That question was actually more towards a joke for your daily undulating carbohydrates, but now you covered the weekly changes in carbohydrates as well, as you could potentially do it. I think like just practicality wise, there isn't. It's probably more of a cost for you to kind of have like different carbohydrate goals, especially if you're massing or something. To have different carbohydrate goals for rest days and training days, then you would have a benefit from. But I think if you can stick to it and you don't have any costs from tracking different goals for different days in the week, you can do it. I had the question on my Instagram a few days ago, or I did answer it in a solo podcast, and my answer was just like, if you want to do it, but I don't think it will be a benefit at all. Especially in a hypercaloric state. In a hypercaloric state, like when you're dieting, there is maybe some rationale to do refeeds, but yeah, maybe I'm more towards the not refeeding side. But I
like to do refeeds with like Gen Pop clients that have life going on as well, that want to eat out and stuff. But again, it's just practicality rather. It's not necessarily a refeed then, it's just a high day versus low days.
Yeah.
I don't say refeed because it doesn't really mean anything. There's no need to refeed, if that makes sense, but the fact that they have more flexibility on 2 days of the week is important for them. So yeah, I'll do that with them sometimes.
yeah, I see a benefit in physique athletes if you prep, for example, that you may have some good data for actually your carbohydrate loading in your peak week coming up. But then if you implement diet breaks, you have that, like a diet break is just like 7 refeeds in a row if you talking about a 1 week diet, if you talking about a 1 week diet break. So there you will get the data from as well. So yeah, it's pretty individual as well, as always, but yeah, not the time to talk about refeeding in a contest prep. Maybe we can do a whole podcast on it.
We need. Have you seen Jackson Pio? The guy he's called Jackson Pio. So he works with he works out of New Zealand or Australia. He works with so he's one of he's doing his research under Eric Helms, and he's doing one of the first really good refeed studies on physique athletes or on like bodybuilders, which is quite interesting, and seeing the benefits of there. So have a look at some of his stuff. He was on Jacob's podcast recently, and it was pretty cool, pretty insightful. So there could be benefits there. It's just in Gen Pop, it's just not much of a difference. They're not dieting that hard to need one, if that makes sense. Whereas at leaner levels, it may be beneficial.
So it's released. It's released.
No. So
Okay.
you can see the methodology. So the methodology and the studies and the study design is pretty solid. Is online, and you can look at that. But the results they're still taking data. So, but that'll be an interesting one to look for.
So there's no publishing date yet?
No.
Okay.
It might be next year or something, I imagine. Yeah, it will definitely be next year now, but I don't know when next year. Maybe mid next year or something like that.
Looking forward to that.
Interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, cool. So actually now talking about pre-workout carbs, what will be your recommendation in choosing your pre-workout carbs?
So there's only really 3 cases where I'll sort of dictate having some carbohydrates pre-workout, or at least peri-workout is. So 2-a-day training is pretty important. So having not just having carbohydrate available, but being repleted of carbohydrate by your next session is pretty important if you want to maintain performance. Individuals that have super long workouts, like we say, like towards the end of mesocycles or towards the end of contest preps when you're doing cardio as well, and then hypocaloric states are the 3 states that I would sort of dictate someone having. Other than that, it will be preference. If they like to have something before and they feel good in it, then they can have it. If they don't, then they don't. If they have time, they have time. And then recommendations. It's an amount that you can consume, won't sit in your stomach, and anecdotally improves performance. So we may start on the lower end and then go up. So maybe it's like 30 to 50 grams to start, and then if they feel like they can have more, they can have more. If they don't, then they don't. And it's not. I don't think there's any cut and dry like science behind that sort of thing, and I don't think we'll really get much. But in resistance training anyway. But yeah, they're the 3 states are more important. Where I'll say have some of your carbohydrates here, and maybe have like, I mean, I may be giving away, but like 30 to 40% of total carbohydrate intake around the workout window in those 3 states potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like anecdotally, people tend to have more benefit from pre-workout carbs when they are hypercaloric, and that changes with the length of the diet as well. So what I usually tell people, if they are dieting, may just a good idea to have some carbohydrates pre-workout. And in terms of what carbohydrate, I tend to say, because that is pretty individual as well. Some people do well on high glycemic index carbs, and other are more towards the lower glycemic index carbs, that they just tend to feel better. And I usually just go with the recommendation of not feeling bloated and actually feeling energetic, and they should satisfy you long enough to survive your training. So if you feel bloated and not energetic and you're hungry after an hour, you may have to reevaluate your carbohydrate source pre-workout. In terms of amounts, I mean, if you're dieting, you don't really have a choice towards the higher side, but as you said, like 30 to 50 grams probably a good choice. And if you're massing, I think anything over 100 grams or something pre-workout is pretty yeah, I think I could probably tolerate it, but I have to consider that I'm pretty pretty resistant to like feeling bloated in training. I don't really have like a problem to eat and then go train immediately. That may change with now me being in a gaining phase for a long time, and just my stomach content is pretty high all the time. So but when I'm dieting, I can eat a lot and then immediately go train. And I think a lot of people don't feel like that, and I definitely have to consider myself as an individual who can tolerate that, and not everybody can. So be aware of that. And in terms of intra-workout carbohydrates, do you tend to recommend those to people, or do you how do you go about that?
If someone's had a pre-workout meal, I would only really recommend one if it's a long workout.
Yeah.
But again, that's in hypocaloric and 2-a-day training or long sessions. So again, maybe if they've had a pre-workout meal, it might not be that important. In a hypocaloric state, it might just take too much food away from them during the day, and they might end up full. But in a massing phase, it can be beneficial because it's just an easy way to get carbohydrates in, as well as maintain hydration and electrolyte balance and stuff like that, because a lot of them come together with a Lucozade mix or a Gatorade or whatever can work quite well, because that can help with that whole thing, and you can get 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrates in pretty easily during a workout without really thinking about it, as well as benefiting hydration. So maybe in that case I would do. Just for practicality terms, and if someone's, like you say, really, really full of food and doesn't really enjoy eating that much anymore, I'll probably do that. Yeah,
I think in a hypocaloric state, you often are just too restricted in calories to any kind of intra-workout carbohydrate. I tend to recommend it for people that are hypercaloric, or hypocaloric if they can spare the calories, and even if they're hypercaloric, they have to spare the calories, because some people even are struggling into even more in their gaining phases with calorie and appetite hunger management. But I usually tend to recommend it to people who have really long workouts, as you said, and if they can spare the calories, it may regulate blood sugar back to normal in a long session, and you have some glucose receptors in your mouth. And anecdotally speaking, that will maybe result in a little bit more energy towards the end of the session, and maybe through that you're a little bit more motivated to just put in a little bit more intensity towards later parts of the sessions. I just noticed that for myself and from client feedback. And as you said, it's also a pretty good way to just do like 40 grams of carbs to just get it back, to just get it in. While I'm training, it doesn't really, I don't have to slam it down. It just be like little pieces of dextrose I take in, or maybe Gatorade or something, as you said. We don't have that in Germany, unfortunately. Or have we Gatorade? Now we have power rate. Yeah. But yeah, I think those are the only few situations where I think for resistance training and intra-workout carbohydrate would be beneficial. How do you go about post-workout carbohydrate recommendations, if you have any?
Again, it just depends on the state. So it depends on what they've had. If it's someone that's... So again, one of the things is that the research showing that carbohydrates and protein are beneficial after workout and they attenuate the muscle protein sensitive response. It's unsure whether it's just the protein that's doing most of the benefit, because in some of the cases where it's been protein and carbs, the amino acids in the protein has not been sufficient to, based on what we know now about leucine threshold and stuff, or the potential of leucine threshold to actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis the most. So maybe the carbohydrates bridge that gap if someone wasn't taking enough protein, but we don't know if protein by itself is enough. So if someone's taking protein in, then I tend to not be that bothered. There's some theory around being more insulin sensitive after workouts, and we may be able to uptake nutrients a little bit more effectively into muscles relative to fat and stuff like that. And being glycogen repleted earlier could be beneficial. But if we're already taking in carbohydrates before the workout, if the workout isn't super long, then maybe we'll still have enough carbohydrates to be benefit of that, especially if we're having a protein shake and then a meal not that long afterwards. Then I wouldn't say it's massively important. If someone's going to do 2 a day, I would tend to recommend a pre-workout carbohydrate meal and then a post one. And with the post one, we can if we have some protein in that as well, repletion of the glycogen is a little bit quicker. And interestingly, in putting some caffeine in that meal can help the absorption and the speed and the rate of absorption of glycogen. So having a little bit of caffeine in that meal as well can attenuate the speed at which we replete glycogen. I don't know if I'm a massive fan, because caffeine's a stimulant, and I'd rather them to try and recover. I don't know if I'd rather them recover after workouts, if that makes sense, rather than re-stimulate the nervous system. I'd rather them start the recovery process. I don't know. But then maybe the case is I don't want them to be fully recovered. I want them still to be ready to go and then recover after the second workout. I'm not sure there, but there's research showing that caffeine can improve the absorption of glycogen or glucose and storage of glycogen. So maybe having a carbohydrate serving that's, especially it's high GI, I think 70 or above, high glycemic index, so 70 or above is what they recommend. A decent sized bolus, similar to the pre-workout the pre-workout size that we recommended, maybe a little bit bigger depending on whether they're hypocaloric or whatever, with some protein in it, and maybe caffeine if you want to throw that in there and be a bit special.
Okay, did you just... No, it's good again. I was hearing like my voice again in your, but it's good now. I think it's in terms of like a 2 days training sessions, it's probably a good idea to have some post-workout carbs, because glycogen resynthesis is a little bit faster after high intensity training. I think if you don't train twice a day, you don't really have to take in post-workout carbohydrates, because even if you take them in later, because you're not training for usually 24 hours, your glycogen will be replenished anyway, so why bother? But I think from a 2 days training session standpoint, it definitely makes sense and it's probably beneficial. I think that was pretty much it. I would finish with fiber, because I think we know that fiber has some health benefits, and I think as an athlete, although fiber maybe doesn't directly have an impact on hypertrophy, it probably has some on health, and as an athlete you want to stay as healthy as you can possibly can. It's the same with micronutrients basically, because I mean you will probably be a healthier individual if you take in your recommended micronutrient intake. Has it a direct acute effect on hypertrophy? Probably not, but long term probably yes. So talking about fiber, what about how do you program a fiber intake for an individual?
There's no real like solid recommendations on it. It's still like an emerging sort of field of research, but it's important what you said about not being sick is important to making progress. The more you can support gut and immune function, the better. And sources and foods that come with fibre tend to be the micronutrient dense ones as well. So fruits, veggies, resistant starches tend to be high in micronutrient value that can again support immune and gut health, which can potentially support ability to recover, ability to do more training. Do you know what I mean? It can just maybe open up that window of what we can do. It's a smaller factor compared to caloric intake and stuff like that, but it could have an impact. And if we're looking to maximize things, there could be benefit from a recommendation there, definitely.
Yeah, I think long term, definitely.
Yeah, and again, the more sessions you miss over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that you could be leaving stuff on the table there, the more times you're ill. So yeah. But a recommendation, 10 grams per 1,000 calories, maybe. If someone's in a diet, if someone's in a diet and they're quite hypocaloric, I might say 20 grams minimum for females, 30 grams minimum for males. But if they're hypocaloric, maybe 10 grams per 1,000 calories. Seems to be like a ballpark that we go with. And yeah, that's pretty, and again, when we have them, it's depending on the source of it. That can be maybe you'll go on this in a minute, but it can be important when you distribute them, maybe. But yeah, so 10 grams per as a blanket, 10 grams per 1,000 calories, or 20 grams for females, 30 grams for males, hypocaloric state.
Okay, and are there any cutoffs towards the higher side that you tend to recommend?
Not really, because there's again, it's mechanistic and we're unsure. We don't really know much about gut health, but these super high intakes, so it depends. So if someone that's massing and they have issues with gastrointestinal health or feelings of like perceptive negative effects on gastrointestinal function, maybe we'll have a cut off. Maybe we'll just bring it down from where they are. But there are no hard top ends, if that makes sense. It'll be based on the person and how they react to it. Maybe if I had a look at the diet and they were having shit like 60 grams, 70 grams of fibre, I may say like, you might see issues with that, but I wouldn't say you will do or you won't do. So again, we don't really know, but massing maybe have a high-end cut-off. During dieting, especially soluble fibres, they can benefit feelings of satiety and fullness from the diet. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily a high point, but yeah, some of the stuff in research shows that the higher intakes can benefit some of the production of they're called short chain fatty acids that seem to benefit the microbiota. And again, in what direction this is good or bad, we don't know, but it can increase the plethora of bacteria in the microbiome. So maybe that's a benefit. I don't know. But yeah.
Cool. And do you tell people to track it as a calorie source, or do you just tend to give like a recommendation and then tell them to keep it consistent?
Yeah. So again, it's a hard one. You can't really give it's funny because stuff has come. I'm sure you've seen on MNU, like the stuff about some of the foods being overvalued in terms of how much is actually digested from fibre and how much is, because a lot of it's indigestible fibres that don't actually make it into like being produced into energy. So it's quite interesting on that basis. But yeah, I tend to not, because they're just a carbohydrate at the end of the day. They're just a branch of carbohydrates. And as long as the food's calorie amount is included within your total daily amount of food, then I don't think that there's a difference there. Yeah. I get that people to track it in terms of the amount of fibre. So I say get 20 to 30 grams or whatever it is, but the caloric intake of it just goes into the daily amount with the food that they're consuming.
So you count the calories of the fiber to their total daily calorie intake as well?
If it's included within the calorie intake of the food, then yeah. I just go with whatever the recommendation of the food is, if that makes sense. So if they put it in a bomb calorimeter, whatever it comes out as, I would just include the total calories of that food. The fibre is just a part of that, if that makes sense. So if that total calorie amount includes the calories included, it includes. If not, then it doesn't. I just go with what the label claim says, because we can't really know, and there's going to be a discrepancy in label claims anyway, and that's probably another topic to talk about. But yeah. So I tend to just caloric intake of the food, and then the total fibre amount is just included within that.
Yeah, I tend to go with the same recommendations. The calorie amounts of the different types of fibers are just different. And so it would be a pain in the ass to actually track all the different kinds of fibers and their calorie intake, and then
yeah, it'd just be too much hassle. It wouldn't be worth it. If you get the benefits of fibre override the amount of calories extra that come from it, I imagine. So yeah.
Yeah, it would be just to have like a amount or like a fixed range somewhat, that you are actually adapted to as well. Because I think you can get adapted to higher amounts, but you should probably work up to it. So don't go from 20 grams of fibers to 70 grams of fibers in a day. That will probably be, you will have some problems. So yeah, just keep it consistent within a specific range, and then yeah, don't worry about tracking the calorie intake of it. Cool, man. So yeah, we pretty much made it into a good hour. Is there anything you want to add in terms of what we talked about today?
I think just making sure people understand that this is more nuanced, and coming from two sides. So if you're a general population individual that's just looking to look a little bit better and feel a little bit better and be a bit healthier, this stuff's probably less important. Think about the big points. But then if you're a physique athlete, don't be worried about putting things out there and trying things that are maybe not proven as an intervention themselves, but make mechanistic sense, don't have any downsides. Don't be afraid to do that either. I think that's an important thing to say. And then make sure that you consider within your energy balance or your caloric state whether it's important or not. That's important as well. So hypercaloric probably makes a little bit. I think you did an infographic on your page about the meal timing thing and the importance and less importance to based on caloric state. That's super important to consider, because you could just say as a blanket statement, people need to do this all the time, and maybe you're wasting your time doing it, or maybe you're not. So I would say physique athletes probably do it all the time or most of the time, because you may get a 1% benefit, but you want that 1% benefit. But general pop, maybe think about more of it, or then maybe we could sort of have it as a scale again. So someone that's really, really advanced, consider it all the time. Someone that's intermediate, consider it based on caloric state. Someone that's beginner and doesn't really care, or just wants a bit of benefit, or just wants to improve the physique a little bit, don't really think about it too much. Just think about total amounts. So yeah, think about macronutrient amounts versus distribution.
Yeah,
sort of maybe have a sliding scale.
Yeah, good point. And I mean, my demographic and the demographic of the podcast is probably pretty advanced, and they want to know about all the nitty gritty and about maximizing potential and being in the moving individual optimal state. But for Gen Pop client, I could imagine that even things like timing and stuff could stress them out so much that they actually lose adherence, and then like adherence is so much more important than like timing, carbohydrates, intra-workout or something. So yeah, good point. And I mean, in the end, it really depends on your situation and on your on the individual. So yeah, nice little discussion to wrap it up. If you want, you can plug any of your content or services or products that you have, and then we can finish it. And yeah,
I mean, services are just, we do one-to-one coaching online, provide individualized programs. We have some templates, some training templates that you can get. So we've got some free samples of the templates as well, and we've got an ebook out, and everything's on our website. So our website's www.myonomics.com. If you go on the products page is where all the products are, so programs, stuff like that. And then the coaching page is where you can find information about different tiers of coaching and what's included within the service, and then apply for the coaching there. And we have spots available if anybody's interested in whatever tier they want. But yeah.
Cool, man. I will link everything in the description. So cool, Aaron. Was an honor to have you on again. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks for your time, and see you next time maybe.
Definitely. Thank you for having me on. I'm happy to talk at any point.
Cool, man. Have a good day.